Yeah, well, great question. It's funny you mentioned the first year because that first year I wanted to quit 6 times.
Okay.
I swear. I mean, there's so many times I remember just writing a blog post, putting my heart in it, and then all of a sudden going up to click that publish button and just being like, who the heck is going to read this? Like, why do I put myself through the stress of coming out with this consistently every week when hardly anybody's reading it? But you know what? I really enjoyed what I did, and there was a few people on my site initially who really enjoyed the content, and it was for them I was writing for. And you know, you want to start with your sort of really close-knit, small core group of people, and then build out from there. That's really the strategy. I can't remember the author, but there's something you want to look up online called 1,000 True Fans. And the sort of basis behind that is if you can get 1,000 true fans, people who would be upset if you weren't around anymore, or who would just miss your content if you stopped posting it, or would be sad if your product doesn't exist anymore. If you can get 1,000 people, then you're made. You're good for life. And so you want to build toward that. Now, of course, at the beginning, when I started, like everybody else starts, you have nobody who views your website. Right. You start with like you and your mom, or your roommate, whoever sees you put up a domain, and then you tell them about it. I mean, that's it. So there's a lot of things you could do to sort of, at the beginning to sort of launch your blog. And that's something I actually didn't do. I didn't know how to launch a website. My buddy Corbett Barr from thinktraffic.net, he did a great job. When he built thinktraffic.net, the first day he launched, he had thousands of visitors and thousands of people coming to his website and leaving comments. Now, the way he did that was actually really smart. He had, maybe 4 or 5 really high quality posts on the site already before he launched. And his primary post that he posted as he was launching was one of those posts where there's like 50 different people that he interviewed and they all answer 1 or 2 questions. And so that's really smart because when he comes out with that, there's proof that you have connections with these 50 top industry leaders in whatever niche that you're in. And it takes a little work to get that. You have to connect with them. And obviously 1 question is better than 10 because they're going to be more likely to answer that 1 question. And as soon as that post comes out, you send them an email back, said, hey, thank you so much for your contribution. Here is a quick link to the post, and don't ask for anything in return. And what ends up happening is, in return, people are going to share it, especially if it's awesome content and you ask the right question and it's presented nicely and it's well designed, which is what Corbett had on thinktraffic.net. And so from the get-go, he was going and blazing the trail from day one. Now me, I just started to trickle content out there. And it's hard because when you're first starting out, you're in that honeymoon phase, you put all your time and effort into these posts that nobody sees. And so after a while, maybe after 3 months, you start to get to that point where you're like, okay, nobody's visiting my site. Why do I keep doing this? I wrote all my best stuff already. It's just now buried in my archives. Like, how are people going to find it? Well, what ended up happening was, and I continued with what I was doing, and I wasn't getting very much traffic. There was trickles here or there, and sometimes people would share posts with their friends on their websites because, you want to write good content. And that's really the first thing. You want to write epic content, good stuff that sort of just requires sharing between people. I mean, you want to write really good stuff, obviously, and we've heard this before from Google, and we've heard it from just anybody who's taught us stuff. You want good quality content. But beyond that, and what ended up happening after a year, after about a year and a few months, that's when sort of I reached the tipping point. And what happened was I connected with a lot of other influential bloggers in this space, in the online marketing space, who sort of I felt like I could sort of attach to because they had the same sort of methodologies or theories or sort of stance in online marketing as me. I didn't really want to connect with a Frank Kern or someone like that because that's not how I wanted to run my business. So I found people like Corbett Barr or Glenn Allsup from ViperChill.com, Derek Halpern from SocialTriggers.com, and all these people who sort of, just were really cool. And I just talked to them and became friends with them. And I went to conferences and met them. And as a result of those relationships, they ended up starting to like what I had to offer. They got really interested in what I sort of was sharing on my blog. And a lot of times, just the word starts to spread, and I ended up getting featured on ProBlogger.net. I never met Darren before, but because through a connection and a connection, I had been featured on a podcast on ProBlogger.net. Then it was on EntrepreneursJourney.com with Yaro Starak. And it was those 2 interviews that really sort of just sent my name out to a lot of people at the same time and got people really talking about my website and sharing it across the whole board. It was, when you think about any sort of successful entrepreneur, or you ask any successful entrepreneur, there's two things that they're going to tell you if they're not lying to you. The first thing is that it was a hard journey, that it didn't happen overnight, that there were a lot of failures. I guess that's three things right there, but I'm going to clump that up into one. The second thing is that they didn't do it by themselves, that they had other people involved in the situation. I mean, you think about how many people who get jobs. I mean, I think I saw an interesting statistic recently about how people get jobs. And I think it's like 20% of people get jobs because of the resumes they create. But what do we always do? We write the resumes, we create the content, but it's through connections of other people or people who know people. That's where people are landing their jobs, is through connections. So you want to kind of take the same stance when it comes to your business and not just create content, but sort of market yourself and what you have to offer, befriend other bloggers, and sort of just dive into that space and become a part of it.
So I want to ask about that, because I think a lot of people launch websites, and I'm sure you run into this too. There's a lot of new sites that come up, and everybody wants to kind of see what you're doing. They're like, I'm going to do the same thing, or, they're going to do something similar in essence. Now, it's obviously not easy the journey, you've been there. So year one was extremely difficult, right? And that usually it takes more than 1 year for someone to establish that they're going to be a staying entrepreneur within that industry. Because a lot of people give up. A year and a half into it, they're like, no one's reading it, like you said, and they move on. How do you how do you approach someone like you now that you're at this stage of the game, right? And say, hey, I want to kind of associate my brand with yours, but yet it's new. It's something that's not really accepted out there yet. Because obviously it's easy for someone from Forbes to say, hey, I want to do something with you. And you're like, well, these are two big brands. They're going to benefit win-win. But when you have someone new with a site that's maybe getting a few hundred people a day, a week, or whatever it is, and now you're coming to a big site like yours, how should someone approach that? Like, how should they approach that relationship, in a sense, when they are the small dog in the field?
Right. I mean, fantastic question. If you're the small dog and you're trying to talk to the big dogs, a couple things you have to understand. One, that there are a lot of other small dogs talking to the big dogs too. So you have to do something to be different from everybody else. Number two, big dogs have a lot of things on their plate. I have a lot of things to do. I don't have time to read a 1 billion word email. I see an incredibly long email and I put it in the I will read later pile. You want to be straight and to the point. And most importantly, you want to do something for me, or you want to think the question, what's in it for them? And so I got this strategy from Derek Halpern, and unfortunately, it was at a time where I didn't necessarily need it anymore because I had already all this traffic and sort of, being known in this niche. But if you're just starting out, a great way to get on people's radar is to take the advice of those big dogs, do what they say, and then send them an email saying, hey, I read your post on such and such. I did it. Here are my results. Thank you for making this awesome and making this happen for me. I would love to be a case study for you if you wanted it for your website. Now, what that does is it gets someone like me interested because, hey, you took my advice and you actually did it. And it worked. Of course I'm going to share that, right? Like, that's how you approach the big dogs. That's a great strategy for how you get in the eyes of those who are, way up there on the A list, because you're actually taking action based on what they say, and you're boosting their own ego by taking what they say, making it work, and sharing that with them and the rest of the world. And so that's a great way to introduce yourself to somebody that can eventually turn into a bigger, sort of more mutual relationship in the future.